Hi there, Randi here. Let us continue. This video I will also put into the challenges in the work material because it will concern both, because here I'm both going to share some of the issues due to the sun as well as some of the challenges that we have with the new technologies and the different changes in the seasonal changes. It is October 3rd and the door is still closed. So this is, of course, part of the next step of how we're going to approach this material. So let me give the explanations I have got, because this is, of course, part of it. And we are heading to winter time, which I have explained. And that means that the enhanced humans of that pocket reality in the Andromedan, or what we could call something that's equivalent or similar to the Andromedan system, but in a parallel universal structure of a different kind. And let us just leave it there because the door is closed. So that means that's not where I wanted to focus. We talked about that already, but that's the door that has closed. And yes, I am no longer invited to the party, which you know from other levels in my material is typical. This is what happens. You are invited and you do what you need to do. And then they are done with their projects and they pull out, and then they will return later on. This is typical. And why is it so? Because of the seasonal changes. We are now going into winter period where by law, the dark times are connected to the dark factions, and they are then getting the control of our system now. So the ones that are trying to do something, what we could say in a manner of progressing humanity, we can use that expression, or developing humanity, to avoid all of these disastrous futures, they have pulled out back to their system, where they will recalibrate and come back next spring, where they will then put a new version of the matrix of change into play. It's similar, but it will have different aspects to it. And the things that we have got this time around were something that we should have achieved this time around. And we can say without a shred of doubt that did not happen. Not at all. So this takes us, next time they'll come around, they will have new modification technologies. They will upgrade their selected topics one more time. And I have got the very clear understanding that I am not invited to the party due to what we could call diverted rates of interest, as in some were on board with me being there, others were not. The 70s were for me, and the rest were just she's not one of us. So I'm not an enhanced human, remember? So I'm not from these programs. So I was, because the 70s, and that's the same as in 2017, where I also had the 70s, and then I went to Australia and they were not invited there, and then I was not invited there, and this is how things go. Not that I am under the 70s whatsoever, but they are of what we call the older lineages, and therefore they know what I am and see it as an interest to have me on board, whereas the enhanced humans are the lot of the human race inside the enclosure that have enhanced themselves via different forms of enhancement techniques to become what we could call a semi-humanoid. And they are not interested in having me on board. So, because of who and what I am. So this is just how it goes. This is not unnormal. You are in a job, you are in a relationship, you are amongst other people, and you have friends, and suddenly something happens, and then you're no longer friends. That's no longer your job. You get fired, and your boyfriend, girlfriend sacks you. So this is life, right? So that happens with the factions as well. But what is important for us to understand is that we are in a long-term project that they have been trying to implement for quite some time. And I am having a lot of interference of the different military projects in America, because I talked to one of the change makers over there, and I have we're talking about some things that happened in Florida and what that was about, and the opening of some of the old Atlantean gates that are now pumping in Atlantean types of lesser positive version of Atlantean energy into the whole area around Florida, which has in the Sora, I always say it wrong. There's a reason why that. There is a Stargate, a two-dimensional Stargate. The 2D Stargate is in Zoroaster, I think it is, Zoroasta, something like that. It's in Florida. It's a 2D gate that connects to Mu, and they are now producing their own version of the fourth cycle that will wipe out all of the original Native American gate systems and their grid work. And then the plan is to implement what we call new code sequences that aligns with the Atlantean factions and the reseeding as part of the military project, and as an attempt to override the Orion hijacking of the military projects. So this is going on in America right now, and that is seen as a counter to the parallel universal matrix races that are on the same hand from the whole California, on the other side, on the other coastline, trying to get in, also using the continent of Mu to get access. So there is a battle going on in America right now for those of you who have eyes to see with and ears to hear with. And I'm trying not to get on board with that one, because both groups are someone I don't want to be part of. But it plays a role, of course, and that is something you will have as a ripple effect in the years to come. So here in Europe, that's supposed to be the seed races of the new continent that will spawn to life later on after 2065 on the most northern parts of our planet. They have retracted for now, and they will return later on, where they will put in another section of the matrix of change. So we have now got the counter forces, the battles in America, the invasion wars, or whatever's going on right now, and the nanotechnology that's been dumped and are altering and rewriting our gene code sequences, and all sorts of stuff is going on. So we are heading for chaotic times, which is what wintertime typically is. And that is, we talked about in the Changemaker Chaos Pilot abilities, that this is where we'll put that into motion. And then you say, well, why even focus on the matrix of change? Why not just let it go, since you're no longer part of the project and we're no longer part of the project? Well, because everything that we study, everything that we work with, we can utilize, because they are, of course, they need to put it into context of existing programs. So they have made an analysis of the existing programs and how they want to change it into become part of what would align with their future version, so they can reintegrate themselves back into this reality field, take it over and make it theirs and change their futures, because they're not interested. The enhanced humans are not interested in living in a pocket reality in a system where they technically don't belong. They want to get back. This is their home. This is our planet. Our solar system is their home. So that's the grand plan for them, to take that over and change humans to be able to be part of that. We also had the attempt to try with the rocket with NASA, trying to get to the moon, which has not succeeded. It has been delayed, and there has been technical issues. And there's a reason for that, which I don't know yet. But it could be something to do with that version that they are now having. Due to the 2D Stargate and what's going on with the Atlantean forces, they have tried to hold to that one from unfolding, because we know NASA is part of the enhanced humans. So we are really seeing that the different groups in America are battling each other to get their hands on what will be left of that continent once the parallel universal matrix races are done, and probably make it less prosperous for the POM races to get in and take what they are to take. So there is a weird strategy going on over there. I'll not go into further detail, because that's military strategy, and I don't want to participate in that war, because it is a war that's going on right now, for those of you who have not really understood the dire situation in America, because you are just living your everyday life and you have not seen the wars that have been unfolded prior and during the stellar activation cycle. There's always this constant war going on over the resources in America. So that's because it has the fifth cycle grid that is in alignment with both Mu, the continent Mu, as well as Atlantis. And the last Stargate of Atlantis in the Bermuda Triangle is there, plus the 2D Stargates, and there are another one which I think that the Klontics didn't mention. But there are different gates in America that are important to the different humanoid races that are here, including Stargates that are in South America, as we know, the 5D Stargate in what do you call it? Not Peru, but the other version of it. Further down, there are these different, with the Lake Titicaca and all of these kind of things. There are some very old stargates that for these races have a huge importance. So this is what they're battling, and that sounds like Star Wars, but it's not. If they can activate these stargates, they can activate the gene sequences and literally lift what we could say what was buried during the clean out of Atlantis and get it back into this reality, and by that create a new continent that will become the new Atlantis. You know that I talked about that earlier, both in the 2025 timeline material, but also in my books with the military projects. They are the reseeding of the Atlantean genome and their attempt to activate that. Then we have the NASA lineages, with the NASA and the Nazi lineages that were part of NASA. And they are, of course, going back to the Egyptian collective, or the, I forgot what they are called now. But they are part of that group that grew out of some of the brotherhoods in Egypt, and they are behind the enhanced humans and the ones that try to get the control of Europe during Second World War, but they decided to grow into something else because they were aligning themselves with some really dark forces. And then they diverted and created new factions and new versions and became part of a different section that are the enhanced humans. So we are having the enhanced humans that will grow out of the military projects in America. We are having the enhanced humans that are growing out of the Egyptian collective. I can't remember what they're called now, which is probably a reason why I've forgotten that one. Probably because it doesn't exist anymore. And they are upgrading each other and themselves all the time, as I talked about in the whole philosophy book with the solar system nations. That's that version. They are coming back each year in a new upgraded version because they have time travel technology. So they are pulling out, and then they have learned their lessons, and then they recalibrate all of these programs and will come back in spring with a new version, while the other factions are putting in their different technologies and modulation and genetic modification and using this nano interception genetic override technology. That's the nanotech that's done from the chemtrails, etc., etc., etc. So there is nothing here that's not going to get worse and worse and more difficult as the fourth dimension becomes part of our reality. And then the fifth will also become part due to what's going on with the pomeraces and with the activation of the old stargates and with the different attempts to literally turn this reality back into what we call a density reality, but under the control of either the transhuman or the technocrats or the machine worlds or the dark ones, and blah, 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 which I don't want to focus on because we can go on forever and ever and ever. And it's an ongoing war that has been going on for over 200,000 fucking years. So there's nothing new to this. The only thing that's new is that you wake up and realize, wow, this is going on, and then you will have a great interest thinking that this is new, this is only something that's happening in your time. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but this is just an ongoing story that is so tiring and so ridiculous and so absolutely not worth of our concern. But it affects us, and we need to clear out the effects of it whenever shifts are happening and whenever reality fields that should have stayed dormant are coming back to life, because that affects us in our energy work. And that's why I put it in, I will put it into the challenges ahead of us, because there is no doubt that if they manage to really amp up these old stargates, a lot of old types of energies will activate, and that goes in and activates types of microbial, some of the earliest life forms that were seeded into our planet to generate the foundation of the eukaryotic cell, or the DNA, the human DNA as we know of it, the DNA that are in all life forms. And that is their plan, to spark earlier versions of this to life so that the human genome will change from within. So that's the plan that's going on, and we must be observant. And what are the side effects of that? That is, as I'm seeing it, because they have managed with the 2D Stargate in America, they have managed to activate some of the Mu continent gene code sequences and some of these networks. And how I perceive that is that I am now pulling weird 4D critters out of my energy system that looks like early bacteria or early oxygenic kind of algae critter or something. I don't know what to call them. They have all fancy Latin names, which I don't want to spend my time on learning because I'll forget it as easily and as quickly. But you can look it up and see, okay, what was the earliest life forms in the ocean of this planet and in the soil after some of the latest ice ages where our planet will recalibrate. An ice age is always a recalibration of the racial networks. And it's typically because the previous civilizations that were there failed. So this is ongoing. This is where linear time merges with circular time, where we understand that for us it appears to be linear, but it is circular and it is in spiral movement. So there will be the repeat of previous times in the new forms of whoever is existing in the current times, and that will rewrite our code systems as well as rewrite our human genomes to act in specific ways and unfold specific features that typically, especially if older grids are activated, are similar to earlier civilizations and some of the things they were struggling with. So that means it's technically what we call a reseeding. It's inside an existing human body that has a specific gene code, but it switches on and off the different RNA dynamics, and by that rewrite the human DNA. And the nanotech that is being dumped is there to amplify these changes. So we're both having a rewriting from the grids themselves as they activate these different gates. And we know we have had the activation of some of the dark gates in the whole Mesopotamian era, the old Mesopotamian era that are now under the control of the dark ones. And they are doing the same code rewriting of their human specimens, which is why we're having so much what we could say similar to older times, types of wars that are religious or with old ideologies we thought we had moved beyond, which we're seeing in Italy, and that will grow into Spain. And that this is just a repeat of the cycles, repeat of the souls that have been on this planet that were dumped here, that are fighting to get their territorial or jurisdictional rights as they resume to their original genetic compositions as the old stargates spawns and sparks to life with all of their distortion and destroyed timelines. So we are in for a bumpy ride, as I keep saying. I'm just putting in more details. What is the bumpy ride? And now you begin to understand deeper and deeper. So with that, we have what we could say the visible effects within the human population that are doing different things. We are getting more far-right political interest, and we are having more and more people that are reverting to middle-age ideologies and perception of females and what we should and should not, and human rights and what have you, just overriding all of that as humans one by one resume to an earlier, less amicable, less socially interested, less inclusive interested gene code sequence configuration. So this is happening. It's just not just because people are overnight are being modulated to become so. It is they're resuming what they were earlier on, because this is what is happening on our planet as the timeline event energies are done and it's no longer upheld. Then we are reverting to our original versions of our souls, our original architecture, along with the original networks that are activated, that were kind of what we could put a block stopper on by the hijacking 15,000 years ago, because it was already in the process then. But the Dracos, as I said, came in and they promised the elders that they would keep that in check. But the Dracos are now gone, so everything is collapsing, and that we are now taking that turn back in time, as we should have done 15,000 years ago. And 15,000 years ago, we would have had a larger chance, because there we would have been more in contact with what we could say the other realities than we are today. So this is the problem. We are now, that's the rough awakening that people will face, and that is what people awaken into. So don't just because people say, oh, I'm awakening, be observant of what are they turning back into, because this is what's happening. We are now turning back into our original genetic composition, and that means what they were before they were put into these new bodies under the hijacking factions. So that's just kind of 15,000 years wasted and made things 10 times worse. But those of you who are familiar with me going back to the old times, you know I'm always the one that puts a foot in the ground and say that will not work. So that's my mantra. That will not work. That's going to fail. So one of the reasons why I was taken away from the scene, because I was never thumbs up for any of the ideas that were put in motion here. As it stood to me, as you know, when the timeline event hit us, we should have shut everything down here. And it just shows itself over and over and over and over again how right I was. And I will permit myself to say that because I feel through the core of my being that if things had gone differently, if there had been a more interest in doing it the ways I suggested, perhaps we would be in a different place. But we never know, do we? It's always easy to look in hindsight and say, well, if you listened to me, then things would have gone differently. Well, we don't really know, do we? Because nobody did. So we are now in this mess. And what has happened, and what is done. And now we need to deal with the consequences of these choices. So there are in the text I put out on the Google site, which I will change shortly, because what happens now is that I will close up this course with the matrix of change, because we know they'll come back and they will try to next year, which both we will have a different reality program going on in America. We will have the reality program in Europe. We will have the reality programs in Russia and China and the different factions. And each year from now on, the factional changes, the factional programs will become clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer for those of you who are seeing this. Some of you that are activating along with these programs because you technically belong there and your template is in alignment with these programs, you will turn into what they are, and you will not notice it. You will not think of it anyways or in any ways or forms. It will become your new religion and your new belief system. You will be changed into what the world is around you. So the question is for the change makers, those of us who are not following the change into these programs, because we are not of that soul material. Our genetic composition is different. And we're doing the progression work, and we're trying to align ourselves with what we say our own jurisdiction, our own project of being a change maker. And if we can't change the reality as we're supposed to, and if nobody's interested in aligning with us, I was talking about this in 17 as well, where I was also trying to align with different groups here that have access to the technology on the other side, so to speak, that could assist humanity inside this reality. It's an ongoing process for me, because that's why I came back. I was trying to talk to some of the groups I thought were interested in aligning with me, but they had been brainwashed by my brother. And by that, instead of finding new allies, I was captured and chopped up. And you know the story. So this is an unfinished business for me. Keep trying. That's why I came here, and I can't let that go because I'm engineered to keep trying, which is a little bit fucking annoying, right? So we'll just divert again, and then I'll say, okay, since, and that's kind of where I went with the teaching material as well. Since nobody's interested in collaborating, well, I'll have to create something myself then. This is where we go with Steve Jobs that says, if you're looking for something out there and you can't find it, well, create it yourself. And I did that with my teachings, and that went very well, right? So that's probably where I will take this, and that's my plan for now, saying, okay, we'll complete the course material here. We will not be under the 70s. They're gone. It will not be under the enhanced humans because they're not interested. I kind of knew that, but it was interesting to be part of their attempt this year to try and get it going. That was the highway. That's why they needed us to do so much. Next year, it will be on an even more expedited pace, because they learned from this time around that if they are to achieve changes, create the momentum of change within 6 months or a 6-month period of time, they will have to enhance their vessels inside this system even further and quicker. And with that, of course, also having what we could say the demolishing of the gene codes, because if you try to amp it up too fast, it will break down instead of progressing or developing, which we have talked about with the time travel they began. with the 100-year cycles, trying over a course of 100 years to change the genome within specific lineages, and then leaving and then let it unfold during the winter time and then come back in spring and then re-engineer the code sequences. And they've been doing that, I get the number, for at least 50,000 years. So some of the remains we find of humans in the soil are actually their gene code reconstruction models as they're trying to create the new prototype. And they have failed and died and ceased to exist, and then they have come back and built on the knowledge that they have gathered. So the gene code sequences are in place, but they now need to change the reality programs with the zip codes and activation of this. And they have not succeeded to the rate, again, all of these rates, right? They have not succeeded the quanta that they needed this year. And even though they have tried their very best with all of the hadron colliders and all these kind of things, they have not succeeded to reach the quanta that changed the quantum field, alongside with their allies that are also working with humans that are trying to alter the quantum fields. It's all about the quantum fields, right? Which is one of the reasons why I'm doing again a series of chemistry and quantum dynamics. And I'm also going to look into the hadron colliders. I'm going to do a lot of study on the material that is there so I can figure out all of these questions I have had over the course of time, but which I shelved because I needed to focus on the progression work. So this is going back in and saying, okay, this is what they're doing. But since we're not invited to that party, which is good the same, then we could say the only reason why they picked me is because I am of a German lineage. My father goes back to Germany and his lineage, and thereby my vessel was suitable for the project. But what they discovered, of course, is that my template and my architecture is not. So that's why the others didn't want me there. The body was a thumbs up. The energy configuration, energy system configuration, not so much. Because as always, because I am, we're part of the pillar project and we're administering the 612 pillar, then of course they know I got leader material, I got all of the skill sets to technically create a reality myself. So that's the question, is have the participation in these different projects, have that sparked enough quanta in my own energy system to life so I actually can begin unfolding that? And have we in my clearing work with the different factions and releasing and the trialing and all the things I've gone through the last 10 years, is that sufficient to allow me to actually do it now? Is it the time now to do this? But first we will go in, and don't put your hopes up, say, oh yeah, sure, you will create what we need. No, because I can only create the project. You have to, similarly as they have done here, you have to unfold the material. You have to put it into exemplification. You have to do the work. I can create as many brilliant projects as possible, but if nobody's following through, if nobody is changing their energy system to amplify the project, the developmental program itself, there will be no amplification factor. So this is why I'm going to use this material to teach you with the material we already got that has not led to the result that they want. So it's now just free floating. And that means that their programs for this year is done. That was the closed door. The highway is gone. They reached a certain amount, but not enough. So they are recalibrating, and they will come back, and they are adjusting, and they will come back in their new forms, because it has led to changes in the future for them, but it has not led to changes here. So they need to come back even stronger, even more affectable with their surroundings, so that the reseeding of the humans, and they will probably next time come in some kind of temporary clones that will exist for 6 months of time, be here, do the work, and then pull out, because they are, as I am getting, more and more inclined just to say, well, the current population, the current gene code, even though they have seeded it in and it's there, will probably remain dormant due to the counter forces and all the things that's going on. And they will instead put in what we could say these clone vessels that will operate for 6 months of time. And then they will vanish again, because it is possible. We know the quote unquote ascended masters, they did these near-Machias, these artificial bodies that can be created for a period of time, which will then dissipate and cease to exist. And if it will just be like you have a neighbor that will live there for 6 months, and then the neighbor will be gone, and you will not think more of it, because the neighbor was there and then the neighbor's no longer there. And you will not think of it at all as in kind of, well, he or she might just decided to move somewhere else. Or you have a co-worker at your job that will be there as kind of, I'm an exchange student or something. I'll be here for 6 months and then I'll move on or move back to wherever they tailor the story. We have plenty of these people inside our reality. There's nothing new. So my best guess is that they will go to that direction to get these changes implemented. And that is part of these collectives of different factions. They have these secret brotherhoods, secret societies, secret gatherings of business people. We got the Bilderberg. We got all of these kind of things that they have had, which have been detected. And then it kind of comes up, it gets surfaced, and then it demolishes, it vanishes, it ceases to exist because now all eyes are on this group, and then it ceases to exist, and then it kind of nobody's talking about it. People get brainwashed so they can't remember it, get wiped of the information, it gets removed, they alter the program, and then people move on and do not think more of it. So this is how things are going inside our reality. We will be more and more noticeable of this as we move further into the future. Okay. So what we are dealing with here is that we are talking about how systems interact with each other. And we're going to use the same idea because we talked about the patterns of change. That's the same. So that's why I continue this material, even though they are gone and they're no longer fueling the programs. I can look at these programs and say, well, these are reality programs that are created and are very similar to the ones we had, or at least that my brother created inside this system after I was out. He began reconstructing the reality fields using these programs. So this is also when you can say, why is it of interest to me to look into these things? Because I'm still catching up what he did so I can take out the cubes and clean it out and resume it to the original pillar project configuration, whatever's left, because as you know, most of it has been taken down. But there is this end of time, quote unquote, type of technology that were connected to the pillar project that when they went into failure, which they are now, a certain program would kick in from the mother program itself that would activate people's gene code sequences so that they could begin really doing the quick upgrading processes to be able to catch the different timelines or code streams out of this system, create either their inner gate systems, as we talked about in the transformative energy system, or upgrade their energy system configuration to such a degree that they were able to create what we call the complexity pattern of the light body that would allow people to walk out using the gate systems instead of just being pulled out with whatever was remaining of viable genetics, and that little orb light body would be able to work out in a full pentagram body instead. So this is where you can say, well, there were things agreed upon when we created the restoration program and when we created the pillar project under the ancient ones. And that was that once, if it turned out to fail, the original construction would be pulled out, recalibrated, and everything would begin to fall apart. And in that process, that's the new grand cycle technologies, as we know. And in that process, we would activate in an expedited rate, resuming our original gene code sequences. And again, unfortunately, with the infection level, with the flaws, genetic flaws, whatever we had with us when we came in here. And normally, if it had happened ages ago or before the timeline event, so to speak, we would have been able to reconnect with our vessels that were in the library sector. As you remember and recall, I talked about then when people got to this program, they put their original body in stasis, created a new energy system, entered into the pillar project, and became part of that in different vessels. After the timeline event, we were no longer able and capable of restoring our energy system to connect to our original vessel in stasis. And that is what we try to change with the restoration program, to find out dynamics. Is this possible to get ourselves back into our original forms? Although they had the infection rate, but we were to change our energy system so that when we resume our original body, we would override and recalibrate the infection, or at least be able to constantly keep it under control. and eventually hopefully be able to clear out what we could say the D13 flaw that were in 3 lineages. And remember, there were the other lineages of the D14 collective that did not have that genetic flaw. So we were not we did not really need to change ourselves, but you chose to become part of this. And that is what we could say, that group that chose to come here, not having the genetic flaw of the previous cycle and completely on the D14 collective. We were whole and sound, and we chose to do these bodies as well. And there was this agreement that if this project failed, we would be allowed to pull out. And now you begin to understand why we've been targeted so much, because we don't have the flaw. So we have the gene code sequences that in their eyes are the healing sequences that they need to get out of their problem. And they are trying to prevent us from getting to the point where the original program and the original laws and agreements that were put in place are observable and knowledgeable for us, so that we kind of stand solidified and erected in that knowledge that, yeah, you have no claim of us because we are here by our own free will, and we can leave by our own free will because that was agreed as part of the project. And if that is not allowed because of the infection rate around us, we will kickstart a specific process that's part of the mother programs and a specific code that goes with the mother code that will allow us to begin to recalibrate and do our resuming to who and what we originally were. I don't know if that works anymore, but I do know that code has been activated in me. So that's why I know this now. And that's why I didn't know it 6 months ago. I know this now because that happened yesterday. So this is also part of it. And I think that's also why they didn't want me there, and probably why the 70s have been trying to activate me so I could get that in play. Because these factions, they are always playing on multiple solutions because they have access to multiple levels of our reality field. So with that understanding, we say, well, that's a game changer for us, because if that means that those of us who have the original gene code sequences, we begin to activate similarly as all the other ones with their flawed gene code sequences and infected gene code sequences are activating, then we are activating as well. And then the question is, what are we to do with that? And those of you who do have the memory back to the original workstations after the timeline event, you know that we have been trying everything between heaven and earth to solve these problems. And we did not succeed back then. And I don't think we will succeed now. So we need to focus on different things, as in when we are working as change makers, as always, when it comes back to the point of how do we recreate the transformative energy system so that we can leave this reality, because we are done here. We are so done here. So that's the shift for me. In the previous videos, I talked about, well, we'll join these groups and try to do what they need to do. Now we are kind of being dumped as not of interest, because dumping me technically also means all of you doing this, unless you are still of interest because your gene code physically and energy system configuratively are in alignment with their programs and what they want to achieve. Then they will pick you back up if you survive wintertime, as they are nicely putting it. So we are now going into a period where it will be, and I know that, I feel that in my bones, it's going to be worse this year, and it's going to be even worse next year, and it's going to be worse every fucking year. So we need to align ourselves with that same understanding that from March 20 until September 20th, that's where we will build everything that is possible for us to build, those of us who live in what we call the Northern Hemisphere, above the equatorial line, above the Tropic of Cancer. It has to be above that. Everything below that will fall into what we call either the fourth cycle, fall dynamics, or under the third cycle, races, or whatever. I've been talking about that so many times. So this is also when we are having people that are living below the Tropic of Cancer, what you're supposed to do. And I can only say, as I always said, well, I can't tell you what is the right thing for you to do, because I know it's not simple, easy to say, well, you have to migrate. right? That would be the logical choice. But I don't know if you're invited to the party up here. I don't know if your code sequence are in alignment with that, or if you are tailored to exist within whatever changes that's going to happen. And since my projects in Australia was shut down and I'm not allowed down there, I don't have jurisdictional rights. I don't have claims. I don't have anything in Australia. I can't go in and say, well, I am allowed to create a group down there. That was taken away from me. So unless I get that one back and I get the allowances, because things are going to such a degree that whoever's left of the original lineages are kind of the D13 collective are shifting sides in Australia and America and in Britain, well, I don't have a say there. Not really, because I don't have what we call the indigenous rights, because I'm not born there. I'm born in Denmark. So I have the indigenous right of this little country, so to speak, by birthright, because I'm born here, by my father's lineage going down to Germany, actually going into the border of Poland, which is close to, I can't remember what the city's called there, but he's from there, close to Poland. And I have the claims of what we could call, due to that genetics, of the further up north, because I also have what we could say earlier birthrights that are... my mother's side, sorry about that. My mother's side goes to England. That's my surname Green goes to England. So I have birthrights there as well. It goes with our lineages, the rights that we have. And therefore I can make claims in Scotland. It could also be in England, but that is so diverted now. So it had to be Scotland, and it could be Germany, and it could be Denmark, because that's where I have parental lineage claims and rights. Even though they have tried to modify my mother, it does not take away who and what I am. Plus, I've had many earlier versions of myself, both as incarnations, but also as step-ins, as it's called, with these artificial bodies that can be created in both Britain and Scotland, not so much Ireland, but there are these little islands of man, I think it's called. I have, I've had a laboratory there at some point. So I have different places where I used to have outpost as part of the Pillar Project. And I had one in Australia. So unless the factions in Australia that are eager to do this should shift overnight and things are changing, well, Australia is a closed door for me as things are right now, as I've seen with other places. And you can say, well, that's just a manipulation. No, that was the level of attack I experienced the last time I was in Australia was so severe that I clearly understood the message. It was absolutely to no discussion the last 2 times I was down there. It was just kind of, yeah, you're done here. We don't want you here. So that was very, very clear, not subtle in between the lines. It was in my face, in my energy system, and constant, nasty attacks. So that's what happens if we are in an area where we're no longer welcome. We get the first warning, as with the closed door and the information, yeah, you're no longer welcome. And if we don't follow through with that one, well, then we will feel it in our bones, so to speak, directly via different forms of interference patterns, which is a nice way to put in energetic attacks. So when we talk about, so here we're focusing just to make me recalibrate your brain frequency pattern here. We are now using this material as an exemplification of how you can modify reality. We are now pulling it, is now no longer in effect, but we're pulling it up to a theoretical level where we will then use it as an exemplification that is the best version we have now inside this reality. Even though they had not succeeded this year, they will come back with a new version next year. It will also be called a matrix of change, because it is what we could say in human language. It is a mathematical, algorithmically driven program that goes in like a worm and alters all of the code systems of the reality field by the players that are participating in unfolding by the zip code information these programs. Next year, it will be different. As I said, there it will no longer be humans as we know of it that will do it. It will be the temporarily inserted physical vessels that will unfold these changes. And they will not do it on governmental levels. They will do it as the ones that are inside this reality, changing the collective thought forms, changing the collective ideas, either as influencers or as promoters or something else that has just the same effect as a political person would have, because you know how the politicians today are so affectable. They are social media prone affectable. They just need to get shitstormed and they'll change their ways. So it's not a problem. This has all been put in place. So governments are no longer governments because they are affectable. They are Twitter affectable, right? So if we put a shitstorm their way, we've seen it with different portions around the planet where people are rioting and then governments are falling and yada yada. So things are on the move that will be put into what we call a more flat hierarchical structure where everybody has a say. And that is how it used to be as well and are part of the original worlds. So keep that in mind. And again, keep in mind, you need to know these dynamics and understand this theory of the matrix of change and how patterns of change work to be able to work with the progressive dynamics as well and with your original genetic structure. If you don't know how to create a pattern of change, you cannot activate your original energy system configuration. Because this is what used to be part of your configuration. This is part of your original gene code structure to be able to interact with the holographic reality using the patterns of change which you are generating in your energy system. So nothing has changed for us. The only thing that has changed is that, we're no longer part of the program, but we will use it as a theoretical, educational, exemplification of something that we can now understand. Okay, this is how it works. So if we are going to do it ourselves, what can we then take from this program and how can we change it into something that is of use to us that we can modify into being part of a version of what we could say the Pillar Project, from where we can begin to instigate these patterns of change in our own energy system configuration, so that in our little local environment will be the exemplification of these different types of programs, which will align us with what we could say the gate systems out of here, including the original mother program that was tailored when this system began to break down so that we could get out. So that's the new step and the next step of the journey. So we will, as always, use the different theoretical backgrounds as an opposition to create the dynamics from which we can grow and create synergy. Thank you.